For more resources, visit rymonline.org.
The Local Youth Worker is a daily podcast that's centered on 5 questions each week. Ranging from the practical to the professional, we're looking for answers to the questions you're asking. Whether you're in full-time, part-time, or even volunteer youth ministry, this podcast is for you.
All right, we're back with Kurt Cooper, and we've really been talking about podcasts the last few days and really speaking about them in a positive light. And so I thought it would be good just to reflect on some negatives to podcasting. We're absolutely pro podcasting, if you want to say that, and think it's good to listen to podcasts. There's a lot of good reasons why Christians should listen to podcasts, which is what we'll actually discuss tomorrow. But today, some negatives to podcasting, and I'll start just kind of sharing one personal thing that oftentimes I've gotten in the habit, by God's grace, not boasting here, of praying when I get in the car. That it's just kind of a habit I've gotten into, and found that for some reason that I'm able to focus a little bit more. But I've found that podcasts actually have taken up some of that time, to where, when I might have been praying or spending time reflecting and praying, that I'm actually listening to podcasts. And as I've said, podcasts can be that kind of directed reflection that's good, and I think that's still helpful. But I do know that it's something that takes up time. And so we've always got to be thinking about how we should use our time wisely. And when you're doing one thing, you can't do another. And so, anyway, that's just one thing I've noticed that I've done less of at times, is pray.
Well, if there's one thing that marks this generation, it's that there's never a moment where we want to be bored. We always need to have something to entertain
Amen
us.
to that.
And because of that, whether it's standing in line and playing Clash of Clans, or whether it's in the grocery store, or whether it's sitting in traffic listening to a podcast, or listening to music, or watching Netflix in the airport terminal, whatever it is, we always feel like we have to be entertaining ourselves. And the one thing that we lose there is that we lose any chance for human interaction. And we have to, it would probably be smart for us to remember that, podcasts are a solo activity. But it's lots of times the way that they're used negatively, it's a way for us to shield ourselves from any real human interaction with the people around us. We can put in the headphones and sit on the couch beside someone and never speak to them. Because we're engaged in this shows, in this podcast and what we're listening to. I flew out here. We're in Texas recording this, and I flew out here, and if I'd wanted to, I could have just listened to podcasts the whole plane ride. I had to tell myself, hey, why don't you take your earphones out and meet this guy that's next to you for the next 2 hours? Who knows? Turns out he was a bivocational pastor, so we made a connection. We talked a lot about his family and his situation, so wouldn't have done that if I had been engrossed totally in a podcast. So, with everything, moderation and temperance, going the right length. I think that's the dangerous side, is that we're like, oh, well, now there's something I can listen. Now there's another way for me to be entertained and not be alone with my thoughts or alone with God or whatever it is. So we have, as with everything, there's some caveats that come with it.
Yeah, moderation is key. And like you said, I think we were talking at one time about this, and you talking about the dangers of just kind of an echo chamber, that because niche is, such an advantage to podcasts, that you can end up just listening to podcasts of people that think just like you and never being challenged at all.
And that's available to you. I tell you that as a warning, is that, look, if you, especially on the political side of things, but also on the, in the theological side of things, you can say, hey, I'm only going to listen to, if you're a conservative, I'm only going to listen to, I'll name check some people, Ben Shapiro and Bill O'Reilly and, and Sean Hannity, and I'm going to listen to I'm sure all of them have podcasts, or I'm pretty sure they do. And, I'm going to only listen to those guys, or maybe if you're on the other side, if you lean the other way, you might say, well, I'm just going to listen to Bill Maher or Ariana Huffington, or, I can't think of a third one. I wanted to be balanced there, but my mind, it's escaping me now. But if you wanted to, you could only listen to those things, and that, there's a damaging side to that. I think, Christians need to be exposed to people who think and act differently than they do. And be careful about that, and not only expose ourselves to, and let the culture drag us down, or that we become more like the world and less like Christ. But at the same time, it's a very dangerous thing. You can get into a podcast echo chamber where you only hear affirmations of what you already believe, and you're never really challenged.
Yeah. And I just think, I mean, there was a few times where, and I won't name any podcasts, but I was listening to some podcasts that were consistently making me angry. And I realized they just didn't agree with me.
Yeah.
And I realized that it was helpful for me to be challenged.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've actually, tried to consistently go back to these podcasts
Mm-hmm.
and just consistently be challenged. And I remember actually Al Mohler was being asked this question about reading books, because it's been said that he reads 8 to 10 books a week.
Mm-hmm.
And he's been known to read at stoplights and things like that, and he always has a book with him. And somebody said, asking him about his volume, how much he's reading, and he just said, well, define reading. And he said, sometimes it's more of a skimming and kind of, not reading every sentence. And the woman who was talking with him said, I don't know how you read some of these authors that are just completely, in another direction from you. And he said, actually, I read those books more intently than the people that I agree with, because he said, I want to know their arguments, and I want to know how they're thinking, and they're challenging me. And so, just to affirm everything you just said, we've got to be cautious of just listening to those people that are affirming what we believe.
Yeah, people who disagree with us are not idiots typically. They have real legitimate reasons, and often they're smarter than us, and real legitimate reasons why they think the way they think. They're not, it's very easy to say, well, anyone who disagrees with me is either an idiot or they're possessed by the devil, but that's clearly not a really healthy way to live. So don't listen to podcasts in an echo chamber. Don't go into that cocoon.
Yeah.
You don't come out a butterfly. You come out something else. What's a bad bug?
Bad bug.
Yeah.
I mean, you mentioned Bill Maher earlier. I mean, talk about a brilliant guy who is outspoken atheist and has probably thought about Christianity more than most Christians have.
A lot of them, sure. Yeah. And it says some things that obviously we wouldn't agree with, but also, just to give him some credit, also, gives honest engagement with believers and people that he doesn't agree with. And I think that is a good model for us as to how we ought to treat people who are atheists, or people who are whatever is in opposition to us. To look at them in the best light possible, so that we can engage their ideas. It's not an endorsement to listen to someone. Yeah,
that's good. Any other negatives you can think of? I mean, there's a few others, but this is...
I mean, there's going to be no pictures, so...
Yeah.
It is, right, so, it's kind of like going back to the days on the farm when you dial in the radio to hear, about drinking your Ovaltine, if you've seen A Christmas Story. So, I mean, there's no video, but in some ways that's kind of a good thing.
Yeah, I think so, yeah. Can train the imagination and engage the mind in a different way. That's good. Thanks, Kurt.